Tonight, we welcome Ash Powell and her band to the stage of the Phoenix Theater. Ash's lyrics are thoughtful reflections that explore the interwoven feelings of loss and joy. And tonight, we'll explore what she's put of herself into this music. And after that, she'll play with this band a set of it. Please welcome to the program, Ash Powell.
Welcome.
Thank you, Jim, Tom. This is so fun. Thanks for having us.
We're thrilled to have you. Before you started performing tonight, you asked me what the meaning of life was in sort of a fun, bantery way, and I said, "Well, when we get to the interview, we'll deal with that. But first, we have to do the performance because we record the songs before the interview." Anyway, you shared with me a quote from the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, and you two were having a debate between the performance and the interview. And when I say you two, I say Rob and I say Ash. So I'd like to read that quote, and then I'd like to give you both a chance to debate this. And, you know, we're just starting the episode in a light way, in a fun way. So here's the quote. It's a real thinker. It goes as follows. "There is neither happiness nor misery in the world. There is only the comparison of one state with another, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief is best able to experience supreme happiness. We must have felt what it is to die, Morel, that we may appreciate the enjoyments of life. Live, then, and be happy, beloved children of my heart, and never forget that until the day God will design to reveal the future to man, all human wisdom is contained in these two words, wait and hope." Who would like to go first?
That is a lot. Ash, take it away.
Well, to start with, I think everything's relative, right? I mean, everything puts, everything else into perspective. I think without feeling despair, you don't really have a sense of what joy is. And I think in general, maybe because I tend towards extremes, but I think every extreme, feeling gives way to being able to feel the opposite. It's kind of like a sine cosine curve. So in that sense, I think he's hitting on something.
Okay, and a rebuttal.
So to preface,
because there was a disagreement.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And if I can preface this by saying that all the ups and downs I've experienced, like with you, and I see in your music, I love going on that ride, and I'm totally with you. But as far as like the general human experience goes, like I think like there's plenty of cases where like experiencing the deepest grief reduces your ability to experience the highest of highs. Like you can be traumatized and stuff. There's like, it's a romantic kind of idea that Dumas is getting at, I think, and I don't think it like has any scientific basis. I feel like we're hardwired, good feelings and stuff go to them, pain go away, and having a whole ton of pain in your life does not make having happy times a billion times better. You should try and have happy times, I think, and avoid
maybe it can give you more
pain.
Appreciation, but I don't think it's necessary. So I agree with you, but I like your points as well.
I am a romantic. I'm a total romantic.
And the album, which we'll discuss plenty throughout this episode, really touches on sort of the extremes, the interwoven feelings and all of that. So this was actually like a very appropriate quote to begin with. I mean, I would guess, Ash, that you feel that to be alive is not to be flat, is not to just like be in the center. To be alive is to have the highs and to have the lows. And that is sort of the joy and sorrow of this existence.
But you know, in this part of our history, I wonder if that's possible. I mean, you can go to, let's start with Happy, the happy child who has never known grief. Does that mean the child is not happy? Mm-hmm. Child does not understand happiness. And there's the other side of the extreme. There are children in places like Somalia that maybe have never felt happiness. And does that mean they can't feel grief? They don't understand their very grief? And I wonder how that comparison works. Plus, like every writer, they're fine until they pass it off in the end when he says, so live and be happy. Well, how can that, then he is assuming that that person has been very grievous, has felt much grief, or what does he know about this person he's telling to live and be happy? Is he telling me that? Does he know that I felt grief or not felt grief? Because he is. When Dumas wrote these books in the 1800s, he was communicating with us here today in 2018. Well, screw you, Alexander. You have no idea whether I felt grief or not. It's just, writers do that, and you can see that in movies all the time, where they absolutely will make a point in one scene, and the very next point they'll just totally blow it off for the experience of the movie.
But I mean,
I love that paradox, though. You know,
That was great. That was very well said.
Jim, help me out.
What do you mean you love that paradox?
Oh, you know, like I contradict myself all the time, and I think when he's going on about these two extremes and coming out of that saying, so live and be happy. It's like ultimately he wants to be happy, but I think he's also very he's got a lot of turmoil going on inside, and it doesn't help that he's built his life on revenge, and that's a whole other dynamic. I would like to not live with revenge, but
what about the pure state itself? A child that is happy is happy, or is that child not happy because it doesn't understand grief?
Well, I think that's a hard question, because we're not constantly going through life thinking like, oh, am I happy right now? Am I experiencing despair? Like, it's also kind of in retrospect, I think, when we are able to reflect and be like, oh yeah, that was not a great time. I mean, I guess you feel that in the moment too, but.
So there's this idea of qualia, which is like our subjective state of being, like what we try to communicate to each other when we're talking about, whether we're happy or sad. Like you obviously you empathize with other people, and I think that's what that's what I take from the Dumas quote, is that if you've had a broad experience of things, then you can you have that perspective, you have a bit of understanding of a thing, even if it doesn't mean that every moment is going to be wonderful or terrible.
What is qualia?
So I think
could you define
qualia? Are your actual feelings, your brain state or whatever. Absent are ideas of the things that we've developed to talk about it. I mean, I'm obviously not qualified to
watch out, Tom.
have this
discuss qualia.
Yeah, to discuss.
No,
qualia.
but I was trying to formulate a thought like you were, and it was only half formed, and now I think maybe together we can form a full thought, and that is that. If you experience a certain type of misery, for example, like if you're different and you're ostracized, then you perhaps have a better way of understanding someone else's ostracization, even if you are not experiencing it in the same way.
Right.
And if you go through life always feeling like you're normal, you don't really have a lot of appreciation for somebody who doesn't feel normal.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was trying to.
And so a little bit different than what the Dumas quote says, but I do think there's something there. It's not that someone who has never felt ostracized cannot empathize. Mm-hmm. It's just it's less hardwired into you. When you have felt a deep sense of pain, you are just more likely to be able to see someone else who's experienced that deep sense of pain and be like, oh God, I'm so sorry you're going through that. It's not exclusive to a person who's felt it. It's just kind of like, I guess, the benefit that you walk away with, that you are more likely to have sympathy and be a kinder, more empathetic person if you've experienced pain.
Yeah, I want to take it to one more extreme. Now in this world, and particularly in the Middle East, or in 2018, there's been constant war since 2005. So there are 14 and 15-year-olds that only remember war. And They probably have seen many in their family die. They've maybe watched many in their family die. And here they are hitting their puberty and young adulthood. And I wonder if they, knowing so much about grief, could even trust happiness. Will they ever truly feel happiness at this point in their lives? Maybe down the road. But right now, there might be moments where they are talking and laughing with their friends or their family. But do they unguard themselves? Do they allow themselves to be free to feel that moment? And I don't know if that's possible for some of those kids.
I think that's kind of what you were getting at earlier, Rob.
I think that was why I had an initial visceral reaction of this is a wrong idea. This is a romantic period idea that doesn't survive contact.
And this is my problem with Victor Hugo, because these guys are writing romanticism at a time where there were people living in the streets of France that, boy, were they not having a happy time.
Yeah.
And were there those folk that would ever trust their happiness? Let's drink and sing tonight because tomorrow I'll be dead. Well, how happy are you going to be tonight? And so, and Victor Hugo, I mean, Les Miserables was one of my favorite books, and I had a great time when I read it in high school and tried to decipher it, and I totally didn't get it. But in the end, when Marius, after he becomes a fighter for the rights of the downtrodden, ends up getting married ends up inheriting a great amount of money and getting married in a very lavish wedding, and then absolutely throwing the bums out of the wedding. And Victor Hugo didn't even get it himself. So I don't know if I trust the sensibilities of those the romantic writers. And
what do you mean?
It's coming from a place of like privilege.
It's coming from a place of privilege, and so while they pretend like they're looking down at the downtrodden and hoping for them, are they? I mean, they are going back to their homes at the end of the night. Did they lift anyone from the streets? Really? I don't recall that hearing about that with Dumas or even Victor Hugo or even Britt Dickens. Did they ever take the point? I mean, they made a lot of money writing about those people. I wonder if they ever made it a point to help any of those people. And maybe they did. I don't know.
Well, I guess what I would say is maybe this quote and this argument doesn't stand up to extreme tragedy where, death and destruction in war-torn countries.
Which lives in this world every day.
And it does. And I think that should be honored. But also for the people who haven't experienced the extreme tragedy, I think that in like smaller, more emotional ways, this maybe applies better, and I think that we'll probably be coming back to this quote as we go through this because, Ash, you've experienced some emotional tumult and you've experienced some change and some depressive times and some anxious times. But yours is not a story of extreme tragedy. Yours is a story of, well, why don't you tell the story? Let's talk about walking on tightropes.
Mundane tragedy, maybe.
Well, look, just because it isn't as bad as some of the worst cases we've talked about doesn't mean that it's not... I had no idea
we were going there.
Oh, we're going there.
No, we're going there. We're going there. Because it's useful for perspective because, in our own lives, when we feel sadness, it feels like the worst thing in the world. It is good to have a reminder sometimes that there are worse things. Right. But also... sometimes life is tough. And let's talk about your life. Walking on tightropes is the culmination of a hugely transformative period of your life.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a period of time that we've talked about a little bit, and I would love it if you could share some of it with us now.
Sure. So I think a lot of the material on the album I wrote in a period of like maybe a year after I was living in India for a few months. It's kind of a study abroad program, and met some amazing people. I was just on the phone today with my friend Jimmy, who was on the program. A really cool sense of community that I'd really never experienced before, and it was in just such a completely different environment than one that I knew. And yeah, just really rocked my world. I grew up very religious, but in the Bible Belt South. Still love going to church. But I was studying in a Buddhist monastery, and really all I knew about Buddhism at the time was like, you're supposed to meditate and like peace and things like that, which I found out not to be the case at all about Buddhism. And yeah, I think it just made me ask a lot of questions. And I think that's really the big takeaway,
Do you mind if I step in? You found out not to be the case at all about Buddhism. Mm-hmm. What did you find?
I mean, in terms of meditation, talk about privilege. It's like, that's not a common practice of a lot of Buddhists that were in the town I was living in. That's kind of reserved for, the people in the monasteries with the teachers, and that's a very privileged place to be. And so I was living in this, interesting little bubble still. But I think it made me reflect on all the bubbles that I'd lived my life in, and kind of helped me start tearing those down a little bit, hopefully. But I think in general, we're talking about, like, as a child, you don't really have a sense of grief, of happiness. You grow up thinking that your set of conditions is normal. And I think until you experience, a different set of conditions, you just take that to be the truth and kind of go on with your life. And yeah, I think it just put everything in question for me, which...
It's true. Well, you called this a time of existential depression.
Totally.
And so what were you existentially depressed about?
I think, like, are we talking about
We're just talking about whatever the period of existential depression was. Like, what do you believe led you there?
Well, I think it was that moment of like, okay, I was so sure about things and taught to be so sure of certain things. And then my experience there called everything into question. And so that sense of helplessness and like being completely out of the loop. 'Cause I think we want to feel in control. We want to feel like we know things. I think that's very natural. And so I was going through a period of trying to feel comfortable with not knowing. And that's something that, like, today I hold to be really important. Like, if I ever catch myself, or if anybody here catches me taking myself too seriously, please, like, slap me. Like, 'cause I think that there's so much, everything's subjective. And I think that's what I also found particularly fitting about that quotation, is that everything's relative. Our stories are intertwined and repel and attract off one another. And kind of that's where the meaning comes in, like those connections. And
did you feel like you were hung up on the identity of who you were, and that was kind of like a blocking point for some things?
Maybe, yeah.
Because you mentioned that you're from Nashville, right? Mm-hmm. And to be a singer-songwriter is like a stereotype there.
Oh, totally.
And just kind of felt like, that's not me. I mean, I'm not going to do that. I don't know. It just feels like going to India helped like break down the walls of what you had built as your identity, right, which then helped you to kind of like be free to actually explore maybe who you were. Yeah.
And I think music was actually a big part of that. When I first got to college, I had my guitar and I'd play in my dorm room, and I started playing a lot more actually. So I was like, oh, I guess not everybody plays guitar, and not everybody's like walking around like singing harmonies and shit. Like, oh.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you said in India, this was the other half of it. Like, you did the personal work, but you also said you found a community there, and a sense of community rather, in music that you'd never really experienced before. Totally. And then here's a big prompt. It's a two-parter. Oh boy. And that the trip really broke you open. Mm. And so my question is, are these two separate observations about the trip, or are they related?
I think it all goes together, for sure.
You had the same realization in Nashville. Not everybody plays guitar. Then you go to India and wait a minute, not everybody meditates?
Yeah, that's true. talk about stereotypes, you know.
But that's brilliant
I mean,
because we all wrestle with, a stereotype exists about this thing that I am or that I do or that I, exhibit.
Right.
And now I'm kind of hesitant to lean into that. But that's so destructive, that thinking about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and just constantly projecting identities, on the self, on others. I mean, and I think that's another thing that I kind of started to like grapple with in my time. But yeah, as far as music goes, it was the first time that I was in a place where I couldn't have my guitar. I was living in a monastery. You couldn't really even sing. I mean, we did, but I had to go into the town over to like a weekend. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I gotta play music. And so I went over to the town over with a friend of mine, and I got a cheap guitar, and he got some drums, and we stored them at our friend Cuckoo's house, where we would go down and like play music whenever we had breaks, and a group would go and sing, and it was just, it was a sense of community I'd never felt, even being in Nashville. And I think partly that was because I was really closed off growing up. I didn't really let myself go there. But yeah, that feeling really kind of shifted things.
I guess what I'm getting at, and sorry to just like harp on this India trip, but what I'm getting at is it just seems like this trip fundamentally changed you and cast the mold for the person that you are here today. And it feels like this album was basically written because of that journey. Are those statements true?
I think so.
All right. I do have one personal question. You talked about how the experience as a whole rocked your world as a sheltered, closeted chick growing up in the Bible Belt South.
I said that?
You did. And I can edit it out
True.
if it's too much.
No, that's
but
true.
Did that trip cause a shift in terms of, being comfortable with sexuality?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
And so that really resonated with me because, whenever I felt a discomfort about my own sexuality, there was a lot of rationalizing for me, and maybe this resonates with you, about how it's separate from my identity. And as I've grown older, I've realized that it's like, you don't really get the full picture of the person without it.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the whole thing, but like it's an important part, and any part of you is going to be important. So
I think that's the fear too, though, of like, oh, this is going to define you, and it's like
100%.
And I didn't want that to define me. So I think that was partly me kind of, I was getting in the way of myself,
It's a weird thing. It's like when you
Yeah.
hear yourself say it, you're like, that is a dumb thing to build my life around.
Yeah.
Because of course it's not going to. There's so many aspects to you or to anybody. But
And it shouldn't have to, So there's this feeling of like, oh, I'm just not going to deal with that.
yeah, absolutely. I know it well.
I want to backtrack a little bit. Did you notice between America and India a difference in the way they relate to happiness and sadness?
That's a great question. Yes, I think, how to vocalize this, like, I think, at least from my experience there, I saw a lot of more like community-oriented living, both like where I was in the monastery and in the village that I was living in. People living with their families and bigger networks of people. And so, and like everything is so individualized here. And I think that kind of goes along with this notion of like self-identity and knowing who you are and like really projecting that. And I think it's maybe more fluid there, which is...
One difference might be that if you're living in a more communal and more family area, not only do you know who you are, but so do so many other people, I would imagine.
Sure.
Especially when it's family.
Right. There's nowhere to hide. You're not hiding yourself.
Yeah.
Well,
make you feel more comfortable with yourself.
Although I guess like there are certain aspects in which you do have to hide, hide
correct.
yourself even more.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's that paradox.
They do have the social rules that are quite different.
Right.
Did you experience the caste system at all while you were there?
Again, I was kind of bubbled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the bubble
From afar, maybe.
also changed not only like how you viewed yourself, but how you viewed the world around you. And this may actually tie in really well to your question, Tom. You talked about the time in the monastery and like when you slowed down, and especially when you got back to New York, just the perspective of like how you process time and how you process priorities. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think life really slowed down for me there. And I was also like, I was in an environment in which that was kind of, it was designed to do that. You know, I realized that's not everybody's lived experience there. Because you have to, you know, work hard and make a living and you know, adult, which is starting to figure out about. But yeah, I think it just made me like pause and kind of, it was a time of reflection, obviously, and I was sitting with myself a lot, which was really, really difficult and frustrating, you know, and starting to realize my block, like all the ways in which I was blocking myself. So in that way, I think it really broke me open.
It's true. And you talked about how the fast-paced, goal-oriented society that we're in, where you always have to be exhibiting a certain way, be a certain way, act a certain way, greed, people constantly looking at screens.
Yeah.
All these things that ego, all these things that you know you just kind of lived and were a part of because that's the society you lived in.
And you don't think about it when you're in it.
Yeah, and you know you were in like the most concentrated place for that, New York City, because that's where you went to college, is New York.
It was like an hour and a half out of the city, but I did spend a lot of time actually in New York City too.
So let me ask you about mindfulness and how this relates to a tune that I heard you play already, the acoustic tune you guys did. You got a great hook where the two of you were harmonizing. What are the words to that hook?
Now I'm bound to nowhere.
Correct. There you are. In America, this is a song about traveling in America. Now I'm bound to nowhere. Would that occur in India? That occurs easily in India in their style of life?
That's another great question. Maybe not, because I think here we're conditioned to think that there is a goal, there's somewhere you're trying to get, there's a person you're trying to be, like an end, product of yourself or something. And like, this is all just preparation for a better self in the future. And
somewhere to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're always looking ahead. And I think that's also what I meant about like slowing down a little bit, because there is a sense of presence and like being where you are. And I think I was never even taught that concept growing up, like just be where you are. Like that's ridiculous. I've got to be over there. I've got to be doing something else. I've got to be, writing that paper, like going to practice. And there was no room for that,
And be where you are is essentially what? I mean, it's just like enjoy the moment. Is it deeper than enjoy the moment? Is it just being? I mean, is that the extent of be where you are? Ooh, I know.
There's another album coming out.
Yeah, it's going nowhere. Yeah, I think, on a surface level, just like, appreciating like, being here, sitting at this table, like talking to you beautiful people, like, but also a sense of being in that, like feeling comfortable in yourself. Like, I think that's really hard. I still struggle with that all the time. But trying. Kind
of two-part question that relates to that. What was your faith and relationship to religion like before this trip? And did this trip affect that?
That's loaded. Mom and Dad, you can tune out now. No, I'm just kidding. So growing up, I think like I grew up going to church, and I was all about it. Like I think that was the way that I channeled my spirituality, and I love singing hymns and just like being in a beautiful room full of people. It's like, again, that sense of community that I think I was always like searching for, and was always drawn to these concepts of like ritual and devotion and like a higher something, and that I think the only thing that changed was the vocabulary maybe when I was studying Buddhism. There's similar narratives, I think, across religions, across cultures, and it comes down to the words that we use, I think. And obviously, those have meaning and deeper concepts, but I think they're all stories, you know, and I think you can see one story through the lens of another and find a lot of similarities. That's another thing is I just think that we're conditioned to be critical thinkers, to see the differences more than the similarities. And I think that's just messed up.
Did you have something to add to that? Because you've...
No, I was just thinking about how the creation stories from different culture to different culture have so many similarities in that very way. And
yeah, even the Bible. I mean, the first two
correct.
chapters in the Bible are two different creation stories. Yeah. So how are you to take that literally?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm going to talk about this a little bit in the outro, but when you and I met earlier this year at a show, we only talked for a little bit, but it was good. Like I felt like a good connection there. And one thing we've never discussed, but I've learned in this, preparing for this interview that we have overlap on is viewing life as a narrative. And that seems to be like something that you have really like integrated into a lot of aspects of your life. Could you kind of go into that a little bit?
Totally. I think we all have stories, and I think we all are like stories. We come to think of our lives in a certain way, a certain trajectory. I mean, the Count of Monte Cristo is a story. Like I've started to see religions as stories. They change, and how they are perceived and are incorporated into society and culture. But yeah, I think we're all just interweaving stories. I don't know. Do you want to expound on that?
That's a great line.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, I have friends who really don't like this thing that I do, and that is when there's like different people in my life and like I'm really fascinated by this new person I've met or this new aspect or this kind of ongoing drama, I refer to them as storylines. It's like I'm really liking the Ash Powell. I'm really liking the Ash Powell storyline right now. Well, I have a storyline with your mother, Emily. I'm really liking the Kathy Studden storyline.
That's a great narrative.
We won't go too deep into it, but that's like an ideal example of what I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
I at the same show I met Ash, I met Emily's mother. And Emily's mother and I talked for an hour and a half about Emily's mother's dating life. And she grilled me a little bit, and I grilled her a little bit. And I learned about the guys she was seeing. And from that, we've become Facebook friends. And I'm really loving the Kathy Studden storyline.
She's amazing, and her life is a great story.
Exactly,
it is.
And I think the criticism that some friends of mine would give to me on doing that is that it sort of diminishes like the fullness of a person's life and existence to just say it's a storyline. And I get that, but that's not my intent. My intent is like, storylines are fascinating.
Oh yeah,
that's what the world is.
And Jim, you're fascinating to watch when you're doing it. I've brought it up before. You met that one young musician in the lobby upstairs, and this kid I was over. It was about gigs. It was about this and that. It was all business, and I was over the conversation. And Jim steps in. I think, I'm going to hand him off. And next thing I know, Jim is getting stuff from this kid that, oh my God, well, this kid is really deep. And these guys are having a real conversation. I was willing to walk out of it. But Jim is able to walk in and strike up an informative conversation, an informative relationship at the drop of a hat. It's the most incredible thing to watch.
I think that we are like not taught to do that. And I think that that's a problem. I think maybe not everybody's interested in gaining over his business or whatever. And to me, it's not even really like business.
No,
it's
that's
just
not what it is.
It's connection, you know?
Yeah.
It's relating.
And I think that we're taught that like community and connection happens in only very narrow ways. It happens at church.
Right.
You know, it happens in your immediate family. And I fundamentally disagree that you can't have a really cool connection with a stranger.
The English language is such a noun-based language, you know, and I think that stories imply like motion and more like verbs and action. And so I think that it's a more like full way of seeing a human, not as like these nouns or these descriptors, but like as a journey, you know, like how did you get here? Like how are we all sitting at the same table? That's crazy, you know?
And when you really look at it and you zoom out and you think about it and you trace it, sometimes it's like the weirdest thing. You met a person one day at one point and then all of a sudden, 20 steps later, you're living in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
You know, and we can get into how you two met. There's going to be a big reveal in this storyline in a minute here, but
I don't know.
We haven't even, but I don't know. Before we leave the topic behind, I just think that life as a story is the most interesting way and really the only way to look at it. I journal daily, and it brings me great joy to do that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just because like drawing the connections and stuff and appreciating how you meet someone 12 years ago at a random show that you went to, and that moment introduced you to another person and then another person, and all of a sudden you're in this place that you can't believe you're at, and you can trace it back to a little moment 12 years ago. What a trip.
Yeah.
And that's life. That's life. And if you,
it's a big trip.
and I can see where life can feel pointless, and life, you can feel like a nihilist. And I can see where all those sort of like negative or pessimistic ways of looking at life pop up when you don't frame it as this remarkable tapestry of 7 billion storylines all overlapping and interweaving.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating.
And you said it. I mean, it is another frame. Like, and you can choose how you look at life and look at the situation. I think I've had some of the best conversations recently with Lyft drivers and like fellow bartenders at places, because like what you were saying earlier, you kind of don't have that backdrop. It's like your points are just meeting on the tapestry, and so like there's so much there to pull from, and
not everyone is going to become your best friend.
Yeah.
And you may even have a bad experience, but that's okay, because it's still a storyline.
Right.
And like the bad experience is still going to be interesting, and making a new close friend, that's interesting too.
Yeah.
Or maybe just picking up like a little slice of life that you hadn't done. Anyway, I don't need to justify why I talk to strangers, but it seems like you do the same.
I think it's also like an act of listening, and I think that's like
your job is talking to strangers all
It's
day.
true. Yeah.
So you're good at it. You're good.
Thank you.
And you're good. And you're good.
That's how I met
Rob.
Rob. Foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people I get paid to listen to people and pour them beer. It's a pretty good deal.
You really got to just break down every relationship you've had to fully appreciate how life is. All these people, nothing wrong with video games, but like all these people who are sitting inside, like playing virtual life, like look at what you can do, people. Look at this. It's
Take
a physical
the virtual
manifestation. Anyway, life's a storyline. It's good. Any other thoughts on that whole situation? Life is narrative.
I love that you see life that way. I love that.
And I love that you do the same. Boy, you described the year that followed, and now a real uplifting one. You described the year that followed your trip to India as the lowest of your life so far.
Yeah.
She's backed away
Gotta
from
drink
the
water.
mic.
Just got to prepare.
We're going high on this one.
Yeah, well, no. See, It's a literary tool, Tom. I said one thing, but then it was another thing.
Oh, this is we're back to the comparison. So you were way low just after Post India.
Just so that I could, bounce back up.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, man.
Because she knew that'd make a good storyline.
I was just in it for the story.
And you know this, we all know this. You learn a lot during these periods. You learn the most, I think, during these periods if you're able to survive them.
I think after the fact, though.
Yeah. Well, that's part of surviving.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You only get to say you survived it after the fact.
That's true.
So is there anything that you can share that you learned during that dark time? Because what you learned during that dark time led to the album that we will eventually discuss.
We're getting there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we pretty much are discussing it right now, but
yeah. I think, having this experience that called everything in my life into question, coming back into the same bubble that I had been in, but it was like I was in the same place, but everything looked different. Everything seemed different. And I think a lot of things were kind of changing in my life personally too. I was kind of after the fact dealing with a breakup and also coming to terms with my sexuality, and my parents were getting a divorce, and I was back in school and had kind of realized how much of a bubble that was. And I felt like I was just kind of up against everything in my life at that point. I was meeting everything with tension, and definitely not seeing the the beauty in those storylines. Just everything I guess was unfamiliar that should be familiar, and that's a very unsettling feeling.
I want to go into the poetry of your song or of your album title because I think that it's a really beautiful visual. But I just want to say something that I heard a drag queen say once that I really like about sexuality. And it's, we spend the first half of our lives, the non-straights, not wanting to tell anybody that we're gay. And then we spend the second half of our lives wanting to tell everybody that we're gay.
I love that.
Walking on Tightropes is the name of the album, and there's some poetry in that title. Could you kind of go into that a little bit?
I think a tightrope not only implies a height from which you can fall, but there's this gentle act of walking across it. It's a very intentional and precarious act. And I think it was an image that really captured kind of how I was feeling at the time. And being caught between those extremes, those lows and the highs, and kind of bouncing off everything, being suspended in the air. There's something about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dangerous, chaotic world.
Yeah.
And you have to walk on this thing, and you're being pulled in the good and the bad, and you really just if you get pulled to one way or the other, you're going to fall off, and that's kind of what I took away from it. You talk about natural contradictions in life that you enjoy.
Here we go.
There it is. Do you have anything else to say about that album and the messages found within it, or anything that feels really poignant to you now? It's been 2 years since you recorded that album?
Yeah. I think so. Maybe even 3. Yeah, I think I released it about a year after. Yeah. But just, I think you kind of said it earlier about these contradictory feelings of loss and joy, and how those relate to each other and how those go together. And I think that I see so much beauty in that time that I said was the lowest of my lows. I mean, I would do it again. It's maybe a weird way to put it, but I don't want to be here now without it. Because I think that...
And you wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that a funny thing? It's you would never trade what you learned from the tragedy. You hated experiencing the tragedy.
Oh, yeah.
Some days you probably
Sucks
woke.
when you're going through it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you would never not go through it because you wouldn't have the experience you have now, and hopefully you feel more peace in your own shoes than you did prior to it.
I do.
And that's fascinating. But I think a juicier storyline would be, how did you meet your drummer?
Well, I'm a bartender.
Yes.
And and yeah, I had this cute regular come in every
day you were open? No, just
pretty
kidding.
much, actually.
Just kidding.
And yeah, I don't know how to read people, so I just didn't know what was going on.
I was trying to flirt with her for at least 2 months.
I had no idea.
At least.
God, if I was listening to this right now, I would be so titillated by that reveal right there. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay. But she's the drummer.
She is.
But,
she's
but wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah.
So-
we're getting ahead of ourselves.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
So you were trying to flirt with this person.
I was really trying to flirt with her. She was not. I don't know. I was like, she must have a girlfriend or something. And I was just too scared to be like, hey, because I went there all the time.
I actually thought her friend was flirting with me.
Because she would be like, if you don't talk to her, we're gonna make this happen,
Yeah.
So I just, drank 2 beers and I wrote my number on a coaster, and now she's my girlfriend. And then they had been playing music for a while, and then I met Rob, which I wouldn't know Rob if I didn't know Ash, and now we're here.
What a storyline.
Yeah. It's amazing.
The romantic partnership and also the creative partnership.
Yeah, which works really well. I never pictured myself having a partner that I would really be able to be in a band with that would work out so well.
I'd like a reflection from the three of you because you have another project as well called Postage. This band's mission statement is, in an age where human contact has collapsed into a stream of imbecilic posts, one improbably attractive power trio gives them the finger.
Ash definitely wrote that, right?
Do you
Rob, you wrote that?
do you
I didn't
have
write
anything
that.
to add to that?
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I'd like to add right off the bat, isn't that what we've been talking about all night?
I
Right?
love it.
Yeah.
This is a great revelation for me too, because maybe we should slightly rewrite part of that, but and incorporate some of this storyline, making actual connections with people and letting our lives move in parallel for a little bit, rather than living out there with some fake version of yourself, all your posts. So that is what I thought of as post-age and stuff, and then also it sounds like postage, and we can do cute letter motifs and stuff.
Well, before we conclude then, is there anything that we left out that we'd want to talk about our friend Ash Powell? This might be more of the other people at the table.
Rob?
So the first time I heard Ash play, it inspired me to write a song later, which you might hear on a Postage record at some point. It's called I Heard the Muse. And I just feel like I think I was coming from a similar couple down years. I had my father passed away. I broke up with a long-term girlfriend, and I was just in a very, depressed place. And I think a lot of what she was talking about really resonated with me. A lot of the stuff that ended up on Walking on Tightropes. And it was just like what you were talking about when, you hear somebody and recognize that they think about something in the same way that you do. And I'm just so very glad that I've gotten to have my story go in parallel with yours for these past few months, whatever it's been. Feels like just like yesterday. So
Kind of does.
thanks, Ash.
Oh, Emily Studden. And you don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but
I don't know what to say because now I'm thinking of all the
She has
things.
to live with me. Sorry. She has to live with me.
Living with her is a dream.
that's true. She will, and as a result, then she gets to have the highs and the lows of the Ash Powell experience.
Oh, she gets them all.
You're great. You're such a great human.
We can both be frustrating at times.
But that's why we work.
It's true.
Probably.
It's true.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, what, has your life gotten better since you were this person? Or what?
No, it's not. It's not at all. No, yeah.
Thanks for that prompt.
Yeah.
Honestly, my life has changed a lot since meeting Ash.
Fine.
Yeah. I like the initial answer of honestly, no, it's not. It's not gotten better. Wild, like really an unexpected, really an unexpected story turn
Hey,
right
plot
there.
twist.
Yeah, exactly.
Horrible.
All about those
The
contradictions.
episodes usually end on a high note, like, oh yeah, before I met Ash, life was in black and white. Now it is in color. Not Emily.
Actually, yeah. My life has gotten a lot better in a lot of ways. I wasn't playing actually a lot of music, and Ash inspired me. I was kind of just working all the time. You really pushed me in a good way. You pushed me to sing more, which I really like to do, but
you
makes
sound
me
great.
feel vulnerable sometimes. But just, and she sees life actually a lot different than me, and we're quite different. But I love that so much because it brings just, I just love you and you too, Rob. And they both are so positive, and I'm pretty extroverted.
Yeah.
So I think that people, like, Libby and stuff like that, people see us as like super happy and stuff like that. And I am really happy, but I can also feel a lot of anxiety as this life is kind of terrifying, yet beautiful, highs and lows. But I couldn't be happier. And now I'm in 5 bands, which I feel like I probably even wouldn't be if I didn't have you. So thank you. Yeah.
I mean, you did it.
You pushed me, but I did do it.
Well, we get a lot of inquiries to appear on this show, and in February, Emily sent me one for Ash Powell music, and I was like, "Yeah, we'll get to it eventually." I didn't say that.
Thanks, Joe.
But then you and I met like last month, I think it was, and I saw you perform for the first time, and we talked for the first time, and I was like, "Oh, we have got to get this person on the show like right away."
We gotta talk.
And here we are, and I mean, they basically said it, but I'll say it in my own way. There's just like a gentle magic to you and to the music that you make. And I'm just like really thrilled that we got to document that here tonight. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here with us tonight.
Thank you guys for doing what you do and supporting the local music scene.
Big time.
It's all we know how to do, This
Keep
is
doing
us.
it.
Thank
Keep doing
goodness.
It's a gas.
Yeah, we love it. What else would we be doing?
Yeah, really.
Sitting at home? There's no
Tuesday night.
storyline there.
Playing video
This
games.
is-
Yeah.
You know do you know what a
Random-
cultivator of storyline this show is? Look at this, 3 new characters. I mean, one return character, and so on and so forth. Anyway, there I go being indulgent. This has been a thrill. Thank you so much for joining us. And now, the music of Ash Powell
Let's get ready to play.
Do it.
Stick around and check it out.
is next. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm not here to criticize. I just think I haven't lied to you. I'm not here to criticize you. I just think you have been blinded over and over and over again. If flying drones above us, got cameras in the wall, putting sensors in the sidewalk, so be careful who you call. hard not to wonder where the info goes. Taking such great care not to let the traces show. Shouldn't we take life back into our own hands and play instead of being played? No. But I'm not here to criticize. I just think we haven't lied to over and over and over. taking their toll on me. I've lost my hold on you. We both know we have been fooling ourselves. We won't be alone. We won't have to find somebody else to hold. No. So come here, come on in. Come wrap me up inside your covers like I'm not just another. Some days I don't wanna fake it. I just wanna lay down, down. I've been up all night chasing the outline of your shadow, knowing that I gotta let you go. You grow so vacant, still I keep on waiting for you to come around. So we won't be alone, so we won't have to find somebody else to hold. No. So come here, come on in. Come wrap me up inside your covers like I'm not just another. Some days I don't wanna fake it. I just wanna lay down, down, oh, down. Ooh, down, down, oh, down. Come here, come on in. Come wrap me up inside your covers like I'm not just another. Come here, come on in. Come here, come on in. Come wrap me up inside your covers like I'm not just another. Some days I don't wanna fake it. I just wanna lay down. I was raised up by the clothesline in my grandparents' backyard. Climbed just high enough to see those car park signs. And every night the hills of Tennessee tuck me in. I've been a few places since then. I've been a few places since then. No, I still remember the day Papa left us. He just never woke up on Easter Day. And I often think about if he'd come back around, all the questions that he'd ask and what I'd say. El Cerrito broke my heart, and Mississippi got me drunk. New York was never quite home, it was a start. Now I'm bound to nowhere. Now Now I'm bound to nowhere. Now I'm bound to nowhere. For now. Well, I've broken down in Kansas one too many times, but the side of the highway learned me love. Yeah, we'd been long over, but as he rested on my shoulder, saw we were bound for different roads. Saw we were bound for different roads. El Cerrito broke my heart. Mississippi got me drunk. New York was never quite home. It was a start. Now I'm bound to nowhere. Now I'm bound to nowhere. Now